Diane Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I've read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She's innovation architect, no other than Miss Carla Johnson.
It's great to be here.
Welcome, Miss Carla. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I
Absolutely.
miss?
Yes, I am an innovation architect. So I say, what do you get if you crossed Frank Lloyd Wright with Lady Gaga? You would get me, someone who is constantly pushing the status quo. I help
Yes.
ambitious leaders become more innovative thinkers, creative problem solvers, and use their imagination so they can supercharge growth.
Yes. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And today, let's talk about how to turn everyday questions into $1 billion ideas. I like this topic, Miss Carla. So tell us that $1 billion ideas hide in plain sight. What is the fundamental shift in perspective needed to stop seeing everyday questions as annoyance as I start seeing them as opportunities?
Well, I think a big part of how we look at everyday questions is that we ask the questions to get logistical and tactical things done. What's our deadline? What's our budget? You know, all of those things. But what we don't do is shift those questions. And I think about it as a compass. So if you think about logistical and tactical questions, those are in that lower left-hand quadrant. But what we want to do is shoot our questions up into the upper right-hand quadrant. Questions that are strategic and exploratory. And those are questions that sometimes we have a hard time asking because they don't have a black and white answer. You can't Google them. Chat GPT won't tell you the answer. And I think that's the biggest thing that we have to shift in moving into those $1 billion ideas is what kind of questions are we asking ourselves?
Definitely. Is there a common trait or habit you've observed in successful entrepreneurs that allows them to hear a simple question and envision a massive solution?
Absolutely. I would say the number one characteristic of highly, highly successful $1 billion entrepreneurs is that they don't go into a situation and they don't ask a question from the perspective of judgment. They ask it from the perspective of curiosity. So if I think about Jeff Hoffman, an amazing serial entrepreneur, Jeff's at the grocery store one day and he's walking down the aisle and he sees the bananas. And right there is, the beautiful yellow bananas. And next to it are the, bananas starting to turn brown that are half price. And so he asked himself, like, what's the difference between a yellow banana and a brown banana? And in that case, it was an easy answer because he said, this is a product that a company had bought that was trying to sell and recoup at least some of its expense because it was a perishable product. And then he asked the question, what other industries have a product or service that's perishable that this could relate to? And that actually led him to ask some of his friends in the travel industry some questions. What do you do with those seats on the airlines that aren't sold? This is quite a while ago before airlines had planes that are so stuffed with passengers. And they said, we just lose them, we just lose the potential revenue on them. So Jeff asked himself another question. What if we applied that banana pricing scenario to airlines? And that actually was the foundation for what became Priceline. And I think we can all agree that's a pretty darn good $1 billion idea.
$1 billion for sure. So, Miss Carla, how do you differentiate between a trivial everyday annoyance and question that points a truly scalable, a multi-billion-dollar market problem?
Well, I think that is the hard question is how do, to be honest, I don't think we can on the surface immediately identify the question that's going to immediately lead us to that billion-dollar idea. I think, like a lot of things, we have to follow the trail and see where the questions lead us. And I think about it in terms of, if you think of Alice in Wonderland and going down the rabbit hole, I think that's one of the things that we have to do with our questions, is that we have to go down the rabbit hole. And with each question that we have, there could be 2 or 3 or 4 questions that come off of that. And then of each of those, it becomes a network and a trail as we go down the rabbit hole. But I think there's certain characteristics of the questions that we need to think about. And I think one of the big questions that can lead to that big billion-dollar idea is, where is a huge point of friction for a customer or a consumer or a partner or a vendor that nobody else notices, that we have a gap that we can fill? And I think if you look at, even, you look at a Netflix. I mean, they saw a huge friction point with having to get in the car, drive down to your local Blockbuster, get out of the car, go in the store, return your movies, shop around and spend time in the store, stand in line, rent your new movie, get in your car and go back home. And then there were rental fees or late fees and things like that. So those were huge points of friction that the founders of Netflix were able to observe, because they didn't just judge them and say, that's the way this industry goes, but they were open-minded about it. So they started to get strategic and they started to explore it. And they asked the question that related to that friction point: what if you could just get DVDs in the mail like you get a lot of other things? And that little question, all around the friction point, because they understood the customers, led to that billion-dollar idea.
Billion-dollar idea, Miss Carla, and I have a $1 billion question. How can we move from our solar system just like through Wi-Fi? Oh, imagine.
That's an answer I wish I had. Talk about a billion-dollar idea.
$1 billion idea. I hope Elon Musk can solve that problem. So, so Miss Carla, can you walk us through a real world example of $1 billion company that was born from seemingly simple everyday question?
I think Airbnb is a great question. That
Yes.
that started a billion-dollar company. Here's a couple of guys who were sitting around. They needed some money. Hey, what would it look like? What would happen if, open ended types of questions that go into that strategic and exploratory part of the quadrant. They weren't looking for tactical, logistical answers. But what would happen if we had an inventory of unused rooms in people's houses, of unused houses that people have when they're not there? What would it look like if we put together a platform, a business, a company, a community, that we could rent out those kind of places for people to stay? Maybe it gives them a little bit more flexibility than a hotel. I know for my husband and I and our 3 kids, especially when they were young, Airbnbs were incredible because they had a
Yes.
kitchen for us. They had a,
Mhm.
a common area that we didn't have to leave the room like a hotel room. And so we could have some kids are watching TV and some are taking a nap, and my husband and I are cooking breakfast or making dinner or something like that. And it's that little bit of a question of, really looking around at the world around you and starting to ask, what would it look like if?
Mhm. Yes, definitely. That's why the hotel industry are now shaking because of
Yes.
Airbnb. So, what is the first step someone should take after they have that aha moment and identify a promising question?
Well, I think one thing that they need to do is that they look at the question and then they need to frame it into a potential idea. And I think this is where looking at other industries to say, hey, where is something like this? Where has it been done before? Or has it been done before? So if we think about McDonald's, one of the things that helped that billion-dollar company is that they wanted to be able to get customers to go through their drive-through a lot faster. They could see
Yes.
customers were backing up, their customers were frustrated, they were having people pull out and leave because they didn't want to wait in line so long. And so what they did is they started to look around at other industries. And that's when they came across a Formula One pit stop. And when the McDonald's group started to look at how a Formula One pit stop operated, they said people needed to be in and out in a very, very short a time. Everything had to be down to precision and perfect. Now we know that there's a lot more risk involved in a Formula One pit stop than there is in a McDonald's drive-through for sure. But they
Yes.
looked at all of the elements because they could see familiar parts to their idea to what had gone on in another industry. And this really helps people shortcut some of those potential pitfalls of what could happen. It also, I mean, when we think about sharing ideas and getting buy-in and budget and perhaps investment money behind our ideas, the more we can tie our new, disruptive, incredible idea that we have to something that is similar or has similar elements. Maybe it's a couple of things that you bring together and show how those elements have been successful in other industries. That helps give people context for how and why your idea could be successful.
Indeed. And then for someone watching or listening right now, what is a simple exercise they can do today to start training themselves to identify this opportunity rich question in their own daily routine?
I think just taking even 15 minutes out of your day and to start to pay attention and expose yourself to something that you're not familiar with. I mean, that's something that Jeff Hoffman talks about today that is an incredible quality that he sees in highly, highly successful. I don't know if everyone's a billion-dollar entrepreneur, but I think, 900 million is probably pretty good. Is that
Mm.
he said they consistently take time out of their day to study other industries and observe. And that's a really important word, observe what is going on. And observation goes back to we're just purely objectively taking in information. We're not deciding yes or no that's relevant. We're not deciding yes or no that is my idea, yes or no that's right or wrong. All we're doing is purely observing. And then taking note of what are all of those little details that make another idea successful, that make another company successful, that make something that happened in another industry really, really successful. And then the next step is to take all of these details. We talk about creativity and innovation is all about connecting the dots, but really being able to observe the world around us. We need to collect the dots, and that's what observation does, is taking all of those dots that we've collected. Now let's start to look for the patterns behind them, because we've seen companies who have tried to copy and paste an idea from another industry or even from a competitor, and it generally fails miserably. And the point in all of this isn't to copy and paste what another company or another industry has done, but to look for the patterns behind what made that successful and then relate the essence of that over into our world and help it structure the ideas that we have.
Definitely connect the dot and simplify it. And
Mhm.
Miss Carla, as innovation architect, what are your short term and long term goals?
My short term goal this year is to get better at snowboarding.
Good
I'm a
luck.
Colorado girl for sure. And, I've been a skier for most of my life, and 2 of my kids, they became amazing snowboarders. And they're always saying, "Come on, mom, like, try it with us." And for a long time, I'm like, "No, skiing's my real, is really my thing." But as I talk to more and more entrepreneurs about breaking through their own status quo thinking about this is the way we do things, because really that kind of thinking really gets us trapped quickly into a comfort zone. I thought, I'm kind of guilty of that myself. So my comfort zone is skiing. So what I'm doing this year is committing to become a better snowboarder. And I tell you, similar sports, big mountain, lots of snow, cold weather, specific gear, but even the nuances. And it's really interesting to go back and be a really bad beginner all over again with the sport. So that's my short-term goal. My long-term goal is a little bit more ambitious. It's to teach a million people how to become innovative thinkers. And I'm over halfway there, but that's my big goal, is that I love to be brought into events. I love to be able to come and talk to audiences, teach them the frameworks and the processes that I've developed that have helped others, so that I can teach them how to be more innovative thinkers.
Indeed, and good luck to your goals, Miss Carla, and looking forward for more success. And what will be your piece of advice for those people out there who want to be like you?
Well, I guess it depends on what part of me they want to be like. I don't have a lot of advice yet to give Miss Snowboarders.
I want to be like innovation architect.
I always say the best way to become more innovative in how you think and more creative in how you look at the problems that you solve is to truly get outside of your everyday environment. And it's kind of interesting for me to say, if you want to solve your problem, the best way to solve it is to remove yourself from the problem. So there's a whole lot about how our brain works and how it solves problems. And the interesting thing is that the more we focus on it, the more we stress about it, the more it's, consuming everything that we have, the more narrow our focus becomes. And creativity is all about, that sense of play. And you look at kids, I tell you, my kids have never not been able to come up with 40 ideas at the drop of a hat, whatever it is. And I think a big part of that is because playing for a kid is really, really easy. And so, adults, we're told during our life, oh, you need to put those childhood things away. Like you need to grow up. But the truth is, we're all born a little wild. We're all born a little creative. We all have that little bit of mischief about saying, hey, what would happen if? And a natural at experimenting at things. And then we're told at a certain time in our life, that's kind of kid stuff. You need to grow up. You need to get serious. Like you need to be more professional in how you approach the work that you do. But that's the exact opposite advice in how to become more innovative and more playful and more creative. So, my biggest piece of advice is think of what brought you joy and made you happy and made you laugh as a little kid, and do more of that. Now, that doesn't mean you have to take hours and hours or days out of your time. I mean, I loved to color as a kid. So I have a 10-minute break, or maybe I'm frustrated with something and I need to think differently. I'll pull out my coloring book and my box of crayons, and I'll just sit and color for 10 minutes. And while it might seem like an inefficient thing and a waste of time, that little 10-minute break to do something creative for my brain, then once I, close up my coloring book and put my colors away and I come back to my desk, I'm in a whole different mindset. And a lot of times, some of those early ideas start to click.
Yes. Playful indeed. And thank you so much for that advice. Miss Carla, and can you please recommend a book or books that influence your journey?
I have to say the book that influenced me the most is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. And there's a particular part in there that made that so influential for me. And it was her perspective about fear and the creative process. I don't think any of us listening, I'm sure you don't, Daniel. I don't think you want to look like a fool or feel silly as you do your creative work. And that fear holds us back. But the truth
Yeah.
is, I have never met anybody who's a really, really creative thinker, innovator, who doesn't at some level have at least a little bit of fear of, maybe my idea is actually an awful one, but everybody's, putting weight into what I say, or, a little bit of fear of what if I raise my hand and share this idea and people are going to make fun of me. And Elizabeth's book made it clear that fear and the creative process actually go hand in hand. And I think that's really important for us to remember. Now, her point is, while it might go hand in hand, that doesn't mean that fear is in the driver's seat. And she used this great metaphor about how we as creative thinkers are the drivers of the process and of the thinking. And fear comes along with us, but it has to sit in the back seat. It doesn't get a ride shotgun, sit in the front seat on the other side. It doesn't get a mess with the radio. For me, I'm pretty particular about what I listen to when I drive, but it is there. And just like anybody who sits in the back seat, of course it's going to chime in. But that doesn't mean we have to let fear guide the direction that we go.
Thank you for that recommended book, Miss Carla. And what's a simple everyday question you've encountered recently that you believe has untapped a massive potential?
I think the best question, and I share this with everybody because I think it helps us really reset how we think and how to become more creative, is to ask the question, what are we ultimately trying to accomplish here? So I work with a lot of marketers, and many times marketers will get caught up in a request. We need to do this trade show. We need to do this landing page. We need to do this email campaign, and get caught up in the frenzy of back to that logistical and tactical part of our quadrant. And they ask questions such as, what's the deadline? Who's the audience? What's our budget and things like that. But what we need to do is move up into the upper right-hand quadrant with this single question. What are we trying to accomplish here? And I tell you, a lot of times we get caught up in the murky, muddy, day-to-day tactical things. And a lot of times we'll end up doing things that don't ever matter and that we don't actually need because we've never stopped to ask ourselves, what are we ultimately trying to accomplish here?
Yes, definitely, Miss Carla. Before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please to listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my Abstract Essay is already in fifth season. Abstract Poetry in second season, and my Book 101 review in fifth season too. Comedy 101 in second season, and my Food 101 in fifth season as well. Geography 101 in fourth season, and my Baby Podcast Law 101 and Mental Health 101. Love Letters in third season, and Movie 101 review, Music 101 in first season, and Science 101 and Sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Miss Carla, finally, what is your number one piece of advice for nurturing the curiosity and courage needed to not just ask questions, but to build the answers?
I would say the number one thing I suggest people to do is to be much more observant of what's going on around you. Now, this can be easy to do in a meeting because if we think about how do the conversations go in a meeting that we have, being observant of the questions people ask and how the conversations go can help you really have a line of sight into more creative thinking that you didn't realize was right in front of you.
Definitely, Miss Carla Johnson. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Yes, people, be curious. Who knows, you will be the next Einstein. So, Miss Carla, can you please invite our listeners to support your advocacy, your projects, or your business itself?
Absolutely. I would love it if you came to check out my newsletter. It's called the Rethink Lab. You can find it on my website at carlajohnson.co. There's no M, just .co.
.co, people. Yes, let's support Miss Carla Johnson, because if you support her, for sure, more and more empowering, curious mind will arise. So, Miss Carla, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It was a delight to be here, Daniel.
More to come, people. See you soon.